Hello everyone, this is Dr. Madhusudan Rao and the program I teach medical students. Today in my lesson I'm going to touch briefly on cerebral hemispheres. We talk the fundamentals of anatomy, its functions, and the clinical applications in, for example, in cerebrovascular accidents. Basic knowledge of the anatomy functions of cerebral hemispheres is very important in order to interpret the clinical signs of cerebrovascular accidents. Brain consists of cerebrum, brainstem, and the cerebellum. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain and it is divided into two hemispheres, that is left and right. They are connected together by a band of white matter called corpus callosum. Okay? Each hemisphere has got their distinct functions. So left hemisphere is said to be a dominant hemisphere where the language generation and the speech is organized. Well, right hemisphere is not cannot be ignored. Right hemisphere is also got very important functions, that is the non-linguistic communications. And linguistic communication is the uh, kind of function of the left hemisphere, the dominant hemisphere, whereas non-linguistic communications are carried out by the right hemisphere. But anyway, before we go into the cerebral vascular accidents, we discuss about the anatomy, functions, and the brief note on the clinical applications of cerebral hemispheres. Well, cerebral hemispheres. Cerebral hemisphere, if you look at the cerebral hemisphere, there are ridges and grooves on the surface of the cerebral hemisphere. These ridges are called the gyrae and the grooves are called sulci. If the sulci are a little deeper, they are called as the fissures. The brain is divided into the two hemispheres by the central longitudinal fissure. Okay? Well, each hemisphere is further divided into lobes. They are frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. And we talk about the borders of each lobe, functions of each lobe, and the blood supply. So, for example, central sulci separate frontal from the parietal lobe. That means frontal lobe posteriorly there is central sulcus or Rolando, and inferiorly there is lateral fissure. Parieto-occipital sulcus lies between the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. Okay, lateral fissure separates the frontal and parietal lobes lying below, and the temporal lobe lying above, and temporal lobe below the lateral fissure. Well, as I told you, brain consists of two hemispheres. Brain consists of cerebral hemispheres, brainstem and cerebellum. Cerebral hemispheres have the largest surface area of the brain. Both the hemispheres, right and left, are connected together by the band of white matter called corpus callosum. Okay. Surface of the hemisphere is called cortex, contains the nerve cells. Appears gray, so it is described as the gray matter. And it has got the ridges on the surface called gyrae, and grooves are called sulci. Deeper grooves are described as the fissures. Well, central longitudinal fissure divides the cerebrum into right and left hemispheres, which I touched already. Coming to each lobe. Each lobe of the cerebral cortex has got their own distinct functions to carry out. Okay? If there is any vascular injury to that part of the brain, that becomes dysfunctional and lose the functions, which will be manifested as clinical features. So, understanding of the basic neuroanatomy, its structure and functions in the blood supply is very important in order to understand the cerebrovascular accidents. Okay, frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is the most anterior part of the hemisphere, most anterior part of the cerebral hemisphere. Posteriorly, it is limited by the central sulcus of Fernando. Okay, and inferiorly by the lateral fissure, which separates the frontal lobe from parietal and the temporal lobes respectively. So there are three gyri, that is inferior, middle and superior gyri in the frontal lobe. Broca's area is in the inferior part of the inferior frontal gyrus, that is posterior part of the inferior frontal gyrus is the Broca's area. Broca's area is responsible for speech, is located in the dominant hemisphere, that is left hemisphere in right-handed persons mostly. Mostly also left-handed persons also, left hemisphere constitute the dominant hemisphere. Only in 0.5 to 1% of the people with left-handedness will have the right hemisphere as the dominant hemisphere. Then, frontal lobe as such is responsible for thought, cognition, judgment, planning, problem solving, for speech and writing skills, okay, your moods and personality and your intelligence. You have the frontal eye field in the superior frontal gyrus, which controls the contralateral horizontal gaze. So, frontal eye field controls the adduction of the ipsilateral eye and abduction of the contralateral eye. That means it is responsible for contralateral horizontal gaze. Okay? If there is an injury to the frontal eye field, what will happen? There is movement of the eyeballs towards the side of the lesion because of the unopposed action of the contralateral frontal eye field. You have got the prefrontal cortex in the frontal lobe, that is the most anterior part of the frontal lobe. This is responsible for generation of thought. Okay. And from there, the signals are sent to the premotor area, from there to the primary motor area in order to initiate the voluntary act. Thought to perform the voluntary act is generated by the prefrontal cortex. From there, the signal goes to the premotor area, from there to the primary motor area in order to execute the voluntary act. That means when the lesion is involving this particular area, there is slowness in the initiation of the voluntary act after command. That's what happens when there is injury to this part of the frontal lobe. Well, our body is represented in the motor cortex in a inverted manner. That means your head and upper extremities at the lower part of the hemisphere, and the legs and the foot are on the upper side of the upper part of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, and body parts which are associated with fine movements, that is hand, mouth, lips, they are related with larger amount of area with high density of nerve cells. In contrary to the minimum amount of nerve cells in the minimal area for other parts, that is abdomen, intestines, knee, etc. Okay, our hand area is large, our area for the face is large with high density of nerve cells. Well, it is the middle cerebral artery that supplies the most part of the frontal lobe, except a small area at its superior border, which is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. And Broca's area is also supplied by the middle cerebral artery. That's about the frontal lobe. A brief anatomy. Coming to the temporal lobe, it is bounded superiorly, it is upper board by the lateral fissure. Okay. Posteriorly by the parieto-occipital sulcus. It has the centers for hearing, that is primary auditory center and axillary auditory center. The signals from the inner ear, they reach the hearing center in the temporal lobe. It has got the centers for memory and language comprehension, that is spoken language. Temporal lobe is connected with the amygdaloid and it is responsible for memory. Vernix area, that is the area for language comprehension, is in the superior temporal gyrus. The center for the hearing is located in the middle temporal gyrus. And this center receives the impulses from the contralateral inner ear, that is organ of Corti. And it also receives few signals from the ipsilateral inner ear. Well, middle cerebral artery supplies the most part of the temporal lobe, except its lower part, that is, except the inferior temporal gyrus, which is supplied by the posterior cerebral artery. Coming to the parietal lobe, it is behind the central sulcus, above the stem of the lateral fissure, and separated from the occipital lobe by parietal occipital sulcus. It is mostly sensory. It has got the postcentral gyrus, which houses the centers for primary, that is center for the primary sensations. All modals of the that is primary sensory cortex, is located in the parietal lobe, that is in the postcentral gyrus. Okay. It also contains the accessory sensory area. Primary sensory area receives the signals from the body, that is opposite half of the body, for all modalities of sensations. That is pain, touch, vibration, okay, proprioception, etc. Well, our body is represented in the postcentral gyrus as in the precentral gyrus, upside down. Okay. Well, parietal lobe is supplied by the middle cerebral artery. Entire area is supplied by the middle cerebral artery except the a part superiorly, which is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. Okay. Right. In the frontal as well as the parietal lobe, middle cerebral artery territory includes the areas that control the face, upper limbs, and the trunk till the groin. Areas that control the leg and the foot are supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, say for the sensory motor function or the sensory perceptions. Coming to the occipital lobe, it is the most posterior part of the cerebral hemisphere. It has the center for primary visual perception and accessory visual center to appreciate the visual signals of distance, depth, color, and facial appearance. It receives these visual signals from the opposite eye fields. Okay. So it is also responsible for comprehension of written language. Okay. So having understood the basic principles, I mean, so neuroanatomy related to cerebral hemispheres and their structure and the functions, let us touch briefly on the blood supply. So, cerebral hemisphere receives the blood supply from internal carotid stream and vertebrobasilar stream. There are two internal carotid arteries and two vertebral arteries that supply the blood to the hemispheres. Two internal carotid arteries, they supply the anterior and middle cerebral arteries. Middle cerebral artery supplies the most part of the superior lateral part of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay. The areas controlling the upper part of the body, whereas the anterior cerebral artery supplies the areas that control the functions of foot and leg. Middle cerebral artery supplies the area in the brain that control the sensory-motor and motor functions of contralateral face, trunk and upper limbs, Broca's area, Wernicke's area in the left hemisphere is supplied by the middle cerebral artery. The anterior cerebral arteries supply the areas that control the sensory motor and motor functions of the lower limbs. Well, these two systems are connected together in circle of Willis. Circle of Willis will help in providing the collateral circulation in the event of vascular lesions. Watershed areas, what are the watershed areas? The parts of the brain that are supplied by the terminal branches of these cerebral arteries. Well, lesions of any of the branches of these arteries results in infarcts of the part of the brain supplied by these arteries. So, by understanding the functions of the various areas of the cerebral hemisphere, and when they are injured by the vascular lesions, and their manifestations will be identified as the loss of functions. Coming to the brief note on the blood supply. You see there is basilar, vertebro-basilar system in the posterior circulation and internal carotid system in the anterior circulation. This is the circle of Willis formed by the communication between the vertebro-basilar system and the carotid system. So, basilar artery is formed by the union of the two vertebral arteries. You see here, these are the vertebral arteries. They are the branches of the subclavian arteries. They enter the vertebral column at the sixth cervical vertebra. They enter the cranium through the foramen magnum. They join together at the lower boundary of the pons to form the basilar artery. In their way, they give the branches to the spinal cord, the anterior and posterior spinal arteries, and they give the branches to the cerebellum. And basilar artery is formed here by the union of the two vertebral arteries. Basilar artery gives a branch to the cerebellum as the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Then it gives another branch as the anterior inferior cerebellar artery to the cerebellum. And there are paramedian branches and penetrating branches of the basilar artery that supply the pons. And ultimately, the basilar artery divides into two posterior cerebral arteries, which supply the occipital lobe and the inferior temporal gyrus. Okay, and posterior cerebral arteries are connected with the internal carotid artery through posterior communicating arteries. They form the lateral borders of the circle of Willis. And posterior border is formed by the basilar artery and its division into the two posterior cerebral arteries. Okay. Anteriorly, the bond is formed by the anterior cerebral arteries and the anterior communicating arteries. These are the things. This is how the blood supply of the brain. Coming to the cerebrovascular accidents. Cerebrovascular accident is also called stroke. It is one of the commonest cause of morbidity and mortality. It is said it is the fifth most common cause of death. The cerebrovascular accident could be ischemic or hemorrhagic. Vascular lesion includes thrombotic, which may involve the anterocerebral artery, midcerebral artery, or posterior artery, or could be embolic, may be possible in any part of the cerebral circulation because of the debris from outside somewhere in the heart or the venous system. they get dislodged and circulate and finally reach the cerebral circulation, causing obstruction to the blood flow. Aneurysms are common in anterocerebral artery and the communicating arteries. Rupture of the aneurysms results in the acute subarachnoid hemorrhage and hemorrhagic stroke. Ischemic stroke. Ischemic stroke is secondary to the obstruction to the blood flow, thereby resulting in the hypoxic injury to the brain cells due to infarction. Ischemic strokes could be thrombotic, and there could be causes inherent to the blood vessel, okay, which includes atherosclerosis, vasculitis, vascular dissection, or fibromuscular dysplasia of the arteries. These are the causes inherent to the vessel wall, thereby causing the obstruction to the blood flow and the ischemic injury to the part of the brain which is supplied by these blood vessels. It could be embolic again. So debris formed somewhere else reaches the cerebral circulation and causes obstruction to the blood flow. Well, look at this picture we are talking about. This is the picture of the brain showing the cerebral hemispheres, cerebrum here, brainstem, and the cerebellum. We were concerned with the cerebrum, that is cerebral hemisphere, which has got the frontal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. There are different areas which I've been talking about. We've got the motor area, which again consists of primary motor area. This is the primary motor area. And frontal eye field is in the superior frontal gyrus. It must be somewhere here. He mentioned here frontal eye field. Premotor area, he named it as motor associated area, is otherwise called premotor area. Premotor area receives the signals of command for a voluntary act from the prefrontal cortex. Here. This is the Broca's area. That is the area responsible for expressive speech. This is the primary sensory area. That is the constituted by the post-central gyrus of the parietal lobe. We have got the areas here, area 312, 312. This is the sensory associated area, whereas this is called the primary sensory area that receives the signals of all sensory modalities from the periphery to the center through the spinothalamic tracts, through the medial limniscus, ultimately to the thalamus, reaching the primary sensory cortex. Primary sensory cortex receives the signals of all modalities of the senses from the opposite half of the body, same as the primary motor area, which controls the motor movements, voluntary movements of the opposite half of the body. Well, this is the vernix area here in the superior temporal gyrus. This is the inferior temporal gyrus, this is the middle temporal gyrus, this is the superior temporal gyrus. This vernix area controls the comprehension of the language. This is the primary visual area in the occipital lobe, and there is next to that is the visual associated area, which is responsible for quality of the vision. Okay, comprehension of the language in that is written language. Well, sort of the strokes we have been talking about after the ischemic shock, secondary to the thrombosis or embolic phenomena, there is another stroke called hemorrhagic stroke. It results secondary to the rupture of the aneurysms or trauma, resulting in the severe subarachnoid hemorrhage with raised intracranial tension and resulting in the compression effect under the brain tissue and manifesting as the clinical syndrome with the features of the dysfunction of that part of the brain. Well, outcome depends on the cause, that is ischemia or hemorrhage. So look at this particular image. This is tells you about the language function of the brain. This is the Broca's area that is located in the posterior part of the inferior frontal gyrus. This is the area responsible for expressive speech. And the lesions of this particular area results in the inability of the individual to initiate speech. He is unable to express the ideas. He understands what the other people are talking about, but to initiate the response in the form of spoken language is defective in the regions of the Broca's area. Well, so fluency is affected, the comprehension is intact, and the patient is subjected to emotional ability. He also suffers from agraphia and apraxias. Agraphia is inability to express in the form of writing. Apraxia is the inability to perform the voluntary act in the absence of motor paralysis. Okay? He understands what the other people are asking about. If you ask the patient to lift his limb, he knows he is able to hear what he is listening to. He can comprehend what is the command means, but in the absence of the paralysis, he cannot execute the motor act. That is called apraxia. So there is expressive language dysfunction, apraxia, and agraphia associated with the lesions of the Broca's area. Broca's area is supplied by middle cerebral artery. Okay. So when there is a middle cerebral artery is blocked, lesions of the middle cerebral artery, it will present as contralateral hemianesthesia, hemiplegia, that is motor weakness of the opposite half of the body, along with hemianesthesia, because middle cerebral artery supplies the entire that is hemisphere, except the occipital lobe and part of the part of the parietal and the frontal lobes, that is superior border. So middle cerebral artery injury results in the hemianesthesia and hemiplegia involving the face and upper extremities. And there is little weakness of the lower limbs, but predominantly face and upper extremities are affected by the involvement of the middle cerebral artery. That's what happens. If the dominant hemisphere is involved, that is left hemisphere, there is language comprehension is also affected by the middle cerebral artery lesions. And also he loses the expressive speech and the agraphia, expression of the language skills and comprehension of the language skills all are affected by the lesions of the stem of the middle cerebral artery. In the dominant hemisphere, remember that. That is, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area are located in the dominant hemisphere, that is the left hemisphere. So lesions of the left hemisphere, there will be loss of speech. That is linguistic speech. Non-linguistic expressions will be intact because of the function of the right hemisphere is intact. Well, look at this image. This is again the brain showing the cerebral hemispheres with the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. And it is the vascular territory of the middle cerebral artery, the anterior cerebral artery, and the posterior cerebral artery. Okay, yellow color is the area supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. This includes the rim of the superior border of the frontal lobe and a part of the parietal lobe. Okay. Entire occipital lobe and a part of the inferior part of the temporal lobe is supplied by the posterior cerebral artery. Well, these are the certain of the functional areas of the cerebral hemisphere. There is the area 8, is the frontal eye field. Area 45 and 44 includes the Broca's area, including this area 9 is. Area 6 is the premotor area. Area 4 is the primary motor area. 10 includes the prefrontal cortex. Area 3, 1, 2 is the primary sensory area. Area 5 and 7 are the associated sensory areas. Crude sense is perceived by the precentral gyrus, the postcentral gyrus in the parietal lobe, that is area 3, 1, 2, from the opposite half of the body. And the quality of the modality of sensation, is it deep pain or superficial pain, or is it the quality of the sensory modalities is perceived by the sensory associated area, that is area 5 and 7. Yeah. In the temporal lobe, you have got the area 41 and 42 for the primary auditory areas, and area 22 constitutes the Wernicke's area, and this is the area which constitutes the Wernicke's area in the superior temporal gyrus. This is inferior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, and this is superior temporal gyrus. The posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus constitutes the Wernicke's area, and its anterior part is the primary auditory area. You got the primary visual center in the area 17, and associated visual centers that is 18 and 19, which will give you the quality of the visual signal and color vision, depth of the image, or the functions of the visual associated areas. Well, ischemic stroke syndromes, they are the result of diminished blood flow secondary to the vascular obstruction. Clinical presentation depends on the area that is affected. So is the site of vascular lesion. By understanding the vessels that are affected and the areas supplied by these particular vessels and their functionalities, it is very easy to understand the basic reason that is associated with the particular stroke. The diagnosis of the stroke is very important when you correlate the clinical signs with the vascular supply. Well, this is all about the basic anatomy of the cerebral hemispheres and its clinical application of the cerebrovascular accidents. Thank you very much for patient listening, and we'll meet you again in the next class. Until that time, bye-bye.